today we're going to plant some lily bulbs. And it's important to say when I'm talking about lilies, I'm talking about Lilium genus lilies, so not things like the daylilies, Hemerocallis and things like that. It's just the Lilium genus, so all the different varieties of that. These are some lilies that I've been growing for years in pots, and I've just taken them all out of their pot from last year. So because it's very mild here in the south of England, I find that I don't need to lift them in the autumn, in the fall, and essentially store them away. I find that they store perfectly fine in a pot in multi-purpose compost. They don't rot that way, they don't get grey mould, you know, botrytis, and yeah, they don't get eaten by rodents and things like that. So it's February now. Normally I advise to do this in very early spring. You can also do it in the autumn, fall. I've taken out my lily bulb, and lily bulbs will look sort of kind of different ways depending on the lily. So you'll see here, that one there has still got its original stem, which was going up through, so it's quite easy to tell where the stem is. It's time to twist that and just remove that. Okay, now lily bulbs will all root from the base, and that's the roots there, and obviously shoot from the top there, but also some will root from the stem as well, so they'll root from up higher here, which sometimes makes it harder to spot which way up you should plant them. So what I would do is try and look for that, like we had with that one, that stem that was coming out. But also you'll notice it's more like a sort of almost like a lotus flower when they're getting bigger like this. That will be the top, and if you're not sure, if I peel one of these little ones off, these little slivers are called scales, and they produce a flowering bulb. The only thing is that they can take up to 5 years to produce a properly productive bulb. However, I tend to get some sort of show out of them in the second year. It points upwards, okay? So you've got it pointing upwards is the way up to plant it. So roots on these roots, base on the bottom, pointing up. But ones like that, I'm not gonna, if it's quite tight, I'm not gonna bother forcing it off, because I do want to see some lilies this year. And that's another good point with lilies, is sometimes when you buy them and plant them for the first, in the first year, you might not get a flowering. And occasionally with lilies as well, they just decide, oh, this year I'm not going to flower. They're a bit of a prima donna like that. So there you go, there's another one there. That looks good. Again, another one with a stem there, just needs to be twisted. Okay, that one could come off as well. So I'm getting lots here, and I mentioned that I'd dug these out of a pot, and I've actually done that a few days ago. So what I did was I just put them in some planting mix and buried them just to keep them safe, and put them in the greenhouse because I knew I didn't have a rodent problem in the greenhouse. So I thought, yeah, they'll be safe. Right. So I'm going to get all my bulbs together, and then I'm going to show you how I'm going to plant them up. I've got my bulbs all cleaned up, and I've generally got about 3/4 types of bulb size. So I've got the big ones like that. I've got sort of medium sized ones like that. I've got some small ones like this, so still a fully formed bulb. And then the last size I've got are like these slivers there. Okay. So for my little small bulbs or slivers, I'm going to put them in pots like these. You ideally want to plant them 2.5, 3 times the depth. So I always go 3 times the depth. I'm looking to leave, say, this little bit here as an edge, but so I'm not going to put the compost right the way up to the top of the pot. I'm just leaving it a little bit short, so about that much. So I go 1 bulb size, 2 bulb size, 3 bulb size, and there's still another bulb worth or more underneath, and that's what you want. You always want, so for instance with the big ones, it's going to soil level is going to be about there. 1, 2, 3, that's where it will be planted, and there's still 4, and at a squeeze maybe 5 underneath. Okay, so let's pot some. Let's start with my small ones first because it's nice and easy. So I get some compost in the bottom, tap it down. Ideally you want your compost a bit moist. Okay, you see that, so it's with the roots down and it's going in like that. You can either use a dibber or something like this where you're going, right, that's one inch high on that, so I need to plant 3 inches deep. And what you're doing is you're going off where your soil level is going to be. My soil level is going to be about there, so I know that's about where I want my bulb to be, and I've popped it in the center there, and now I just cover it over. And that's the simplest way of planting it. 3 bulbs deep, 1 single bulb in a pot, okay, and just whacking a label in it. Red lilies. I did somehow though find the original label, and it's just a supermarket lily marked red, garden lily red. So that's all we've got to go with. But I will put a picture of what these look like up on the screen. With this larger pot, I find the easiest method to do it is to measure my bulb, okay, and this is saying that, again, it's about 1 inch, maybe just over, so I want to go sort of 4 to 3 inches deep. I'm allowing for my soil level on the top of my pot, and I'm just measuring, I'm getting it to where, let's say about 4 inches there off the top of my pot, and I know that where my dibber is at the moment, the tip, is where the bulb can go. So what I'm going to do is I've got a Sharpie, and all I'm doing is I've made a mark, and I'm just going to put a cross. I always put a cross because it's more easier to distinguish than a dot or a line once you've got the pot dirty. So all I need to do is get my compost level up to equal with that cross. Give it a tap down like that just to get it level. And then I can pop my bulb in. Roots at the bottom, pointy ends at the top. And that one is going in the center there. So that's my large one. Then what I'm going to use is some of these medium-sized ones round the outside. Now I've squeezed about 5 in there. Okay, so with this spacing of these bulbs, you see I put the big one in the center, the little ones around, and I'm looking to put this sort of average bulb size between a bulb as a spacer. So that's the sort of space you're looking between bulbs, okay? So you could see here that I could go a bit tighter around the outside edge, but actually I feel that's going to be about right for this size container. So now all I've got to do is backfill. And again, the spacing is the same as if it was in the ground or in a pot. You can normally get away with it a bit tighter in a pot because you're more likely to be lifting them and like we're doing here, separating them out each time. And once you've got to a decent level, you can gently tap to just get any air pockets out of the compost, or you can very gently firm down, very gently indeed. Okay, and I'm just going to fill up now to this level, and there we are. That's done. All we need in it is a label. And I like to tuck my labels in so you can't really see them, just like that, but I can pull them out just to remind myself. So planting mix or compost, which one would you use? I would use just the peat-free multi-purpose compost for lilies. Obviously if they're going into the ground, I might add in to the existing soil a bit of grit, a bit of peat-free compost. I might even consider putting some grit for the bulbs themselves to sit on if I've got a heavy soil. I like to use my own planting mix, which is a third coir, a third vermiculite and a third mix of different shop and trade multi-purpose peat-free composts. I also add a little bit of slow release plant food. This lasts up to 6 months, and if I wanted to, I could, when the lilies were in bud and flower, feed them with like a feed. So say something like a liquid tomato feed. You just want something that's high in potassium.
Okay, now we're going to jump back to the slivers or the scales that I talked about earlier, and I'm going to show you the method I like to do scaling, where I'm growing a flowering bulb from these little slivers.
When you're doing some of these small little slices, these little slivers, you're just obviously making sure that the pointy end goes up. Some of them will already have started to form some roots on the base, maybe even. I find it's probably easiest with these is to have my compost already filled up, get a dibber like that, go down, and again this is about anywhere from sort of 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, so I know that I want to go about 2.5 inches down, and I just slide it down into the hole I've made with the dibber, make sure it's on at the bottom where it should be, and then I just firm the compost back down into that hole. And with this one I can probably fit about 3 of these slivers in here. Again, you can plant them just by building up the compost level like I did with the previous ones. When do these little fellas flower? Well, it depends on the variety. You can get lily varieties that flower in the spring, summer, and even summers late into the autumn or fall to the sort of first heavy frosts. So you could be looking anywhere from as early as March to say as late as October. These particular ones are more summer flowering variety, sort of they can flower from about May, June, July, something like that. So the advantage of having lilies in pots like this is that you can move them into prime spots when they're in flower. So that's fantastic. So you can create, particularly with these sort of ones like I've got here, a red lily where you can put it near the front of a border or something like that. Really pings. You can use them in really tactically, and then when they finish flowering you just remove them and put them somewhere quiet out of the way. So that's a great tip with lilies. What do they suffer from? Well, the bulbs particular, but also the leaves can suffer with botrytis, grey mould. I've got a video about that coming out, so that will be in my playlists. The best tip I can say is if you can get away with keeping them in the pots over the winter and not lifting them and storing them, that's probably your best chance to tackle botrytis. However, if you're in a very cold area or in a very wet, heavy soil, then you're going to want to probably lift them. What else can I say? The slugs and snails love them, so You'll just have to tackle slugs and snails how you choose to tackle slugs and snails. The other big one to watch for, which I definitely do get, is red lily beetle. It's a little red beetle. It's actually a really nice looking beetle, and you'll often find it hiding somewhere on the lily. The first evidence you'll get of it is that it will normally have a bit of a nibble of the leaves. It will also eat the flowers, and you will often find it hiding on the underneath of the leaf. So I find the best way is to just squish the little fellas and just keep their populations under control. There are sprays for lily beetles that you can use, your sort of pesticide sprays, but I personally don't feel that they're necessary in a home environment. You can easily just go around sort of daily or every few days and just keep an eye for the lily beetle and just give it a squish. So I'm just having a look in my little notebook here under the lily section. These are my personal notes that I just write down of things that I've mentioned to people and they thought, oh really? And it's stuff that I take for granted. So I've just sort of had a little scan through of things I might not have mentioned already. I've obviously mentioned about the feeding, about I use a slow release feed, and then I can use a tomato feed when it's in bud and flower. So it's important to keep them moist but not wet. So I find a moisture meter works really well for that, because you're going to want to keep this compost or the ground moist but not wet at all stages. They can get away with being fairly dry over the winter, but any time that they're in growth they want a bit of moisture. Remove spent and faded flowers and leaves. They're not going to do the plant any favours, and you might get a repeat flowering with some varieties if you're removing those spent flowers. Repotting. You can repot every year if you want to, and if you've got them planted in the ground and you're on heavy soil, you may well do that. So that's fine. I like to repot mine every 2 to 3 years. Depends on how much I've kept that compost fed and what they're actually planted in. In this planting mix, I could definitely get away with 3 years if I want to. But if I find it's getting a bit crowded in there, it's put on a lot of extra bulbs, and I'll repot it. If you're not repotting every year, it's so important to top dress. And I've got a video on top dressing that you can watch in the playlists. But essentially all it is scraping the surface of the compost that you've got existing there, and just putting fresh compost with perhaps a slow release feed over the top. Staking. I often forget to mention to people, but it's quite an obvious thing. If your variety gets quite tall, you're going to probably want to put some stakes in to just help keep it balanced. Now you might not need to tie them into the stakes, it depends on the variety, but again with some you may. Particularly some of the giant lilies you're getting now, you'll definitely need to have them staked and tied on. And I think that's it.